We begin, though, with a CBC exclusive story. Former Conservative leadership candidate Kevin O'Leary is taking the feds to court. He wants to see changes in the rules over campaign financing. Businessman Kevin O'Leary still owes more than $429,000 for his failed 2017 Conservative leadership bid. More than $300,000 of the debt is owed to small and mid-sized businesses. O'Leary has been fighting to pay those businesses back out of his own pocket, but Election Act rules limit candidates to spending no more than $25,000 of their own money. So O'Leary is taking the feds to court. His legal challenge states the current contribution limits in the Elections Act are, quote, unreasonably restrictive. And the penalty for failing to pay back campaign debts within 3 years violates his charter rights, specifically his right to freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, his right to vote and to be eligible to serve as a member of a legislature, and his right to life, liberty, and security of the person. So how does Kevin O'Leary plan to argue his case? Let's ask him. Kevin O'Leary joins us from our New York studio. Hi, Mr. O'Leary. Nice to see you again.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So, Mr. O'Leary, how do caps on campaign spending infringe on your freedom of expression, as you're alleging in this application?
Well, I'll give you an example. I'm obviously doing this to challenge it on the basis for every party. I mean, we're talking about the process we as Canadians go through to elect our leaders for any political party. And so what happens in this is when you create laws like this and time passes and basically the market changes, there's a lot of unintended consequences that don't get modified based on the current times. And I'll give you an example. In the recent Conservative race, we had 14 candidates. Many of them were not in politics. They had no mandate. They were private sector citizens that came into the race and, of course, like everybody else, had to abide by the rules. And currently that would be the maximum any one Canadian can give is $1,575. Now, basically every campaign in the history of leadership races in Canada runs deficits. And what we've learned, at least I have in examining this process, is obviously most of them don't pay, or many of them never pay back the debt to small vendors. This is really a bad unintended consequence because they have no mandate after they've left the race. They're private citizens, they're not involved in politics, and when they go to Canadians and say, I need to raise more money for a candidacy that's over, after all, in the race of 14 candidates in the Conservative Party, only one could win, and many of them are no longer involved in politics. Why would a Canadian, and this is the constitutional right issue that we have to deal with, as a Canadian, you're only allowed to give $1,575 a year for any candidate, including the one that is no longer in the race. You are losing your right to participate in an actually ongoing contest.
So how
you as a Canadian are giving money to a...
Mr. O'Leary,
I'm sorry, that's unconstitutional.
Sorry, but how have other candidates been able to pay back?
To ask them for money.
How have other candidates been able to pay back their debt?
Say it again?
How have other candidates been able to pay back their debt?
Some of them do if they have small deficits, but if you have a small deficit, maybe you can. But there's many, if you go back at history, and all parties, you'll find out that many never paid back their vendors. And that is simply unfair to the small vendors. This whole petition started when I went to Elections Canada and said, okay, I found out there's a bunch of people that are owed money. I'd like to pay them back, and then I will, of course, go onwards and raise money over time. It seems very unfair that a small vendor owed $2,200 who can barely keep his doors open shouldn't be paid back. I also argue that's un-Canadian. If you're out of the race and you're not a politician anymore and you owe money to a fellow citizen, where is it right that the law protects you from ever paying them back? That is un-Canadian. That is unconstitutional. That is simply wrong.
You knew
and all
those
I'm
rules,
doing
though.
is saying, look, no one's ever gone on to spend money to do this. This is costing me a lot of money to bring this contest forward. I want to do something for my country. I want to fix this broken law that is such a horrific mandate now.
You knew those rules, though, prior to entering the race. They have been established for a long time. They shouldn't have come as a surprise.
No, they're not a surprise, but I'm telling you, nobody understands the unintended consequences till they go through the process. Less than 0.0001 of our citizenship ever run a political race. I'll give you another example. I have 6 people involved in processing a $10 refund, and it took them 2 months to do it because of how onerous and difficult it is to work within these rules. Imagine 6 people burning their time for 2 months to process a $10 refund. I argue that doesn't make sense either. If you go and talk to people that are running in politics now or considering it, many of them won't get involved because the rules are too onerous. So great men and women that should be coming into the gene pool won't do it because we've made it too difficult to actually run these processes. I argue that is unconstitutional because we're actually breeding mediocrity into our options across all parties. I want every Canadian to have the option to come in and realize it's not that difficult to offer your services. Instead, we punish them with arcane and laws that breed all kinds of mediocrity into our pool. I think that's wrong. There's so much wrong with these rules. Somebody had to do this, and I'm proud to be the Canadian that is doing it.
Mr. O'Leary, though, the reason that there are spending limits, whether it be to pay back campaign debt or to contribute to a campaign, is so that those who are more wealthy can't be better advantaged, can't exercise undue influence. Do you understand the underpinnings of those rules?
Of course, but think about this. I'm not proposing we change that. If you want to make the arbitrary limit $15.75, it doesn't matter how wealthy you are. What I'm looking at is who should pay these people back. If you're a wealthy person and you have to go out and raise money at $15.75 at a time, that's fine. But if you run a deficit and you're no longer in the race, how do you do that? And that's the big issue. You end up with a whole bunch of people that never get paid back. I'm not suggesting that we're going to change the underpinnings of the concept that wealthy people shouldn't be able to fund their own campaigns. That's fine, but the rules we have in Canada is if we want to modify this law, the way we have to fix it is strike it down first, render it void, and then as Canadians gather together, all parties, and come up with a better law. And that's what I'm attempting to do. This is going to be a long process, but if I'm successful, I want you to understand something. I'm doing this for you. I want you to have better leaders proposed forward that you don't have right now because they won't get involved in this process. I'm doing this for every other Canadian.
But if you can just pay back your own debt, Mr. O'Leary, does that not advantage someone who is wealthy over someone who is not? You'll raise more money because you can just pay it off yourself.
Absolutely not. You can't raise money. No. Think about this. The rule as it states right now is I have to raise it $15.75 at a time. That doesn't change. Obviously, that's the problem. The question is, if a deficit is created because campaigns now cost a lot more than people used to spend, that's just the nature of the market today, you still have to go and raise it $15.75 at a time as you're raising it. It becomes more important to ask who pays it back after the campaign and the race is over, after the single leader is chosen. Who pays it back? Right now, the answer is nobody has to pay it back. So let's just
they do have to pay it back. There's
all those vendors out there.
People who are running have to. You eventually have to. There's just rules around how you can raise the money to do so.
Why not go back over the last 15 years and look at races? I'm bringing affidavits with me of all kinds of vendors who have been absolutely shafted, and they've worked for all kinds of parties. Their voice will now be heard in the courts. They will cry out that these rules don't work in Canada. They will be the first proponents to have these changes done. It's un-Canadian what's going on here. Taking advantage of small vendors is absolutely outrageous. It's crazy that I'm sitting here as a wealthy man watching some poor vendor who can't afford to keep their doors open be protected by a law, and they can't even sue me. They can't even take me to court. It's just wrong. And that's the kind of thing I'm going to fix. It's an outrage. Many people don't even understand this is going on. This is the dirty secret of how this rule has really had all kinds of horrible unintended consequences, and it's got to be fixed. Let's take it in front of a judge. Let's see what happens on a constitutional challenge. I've hired the best constitutional lawyer in the country, and I'm doing this on behalf of every single Canadian to make our country better.